saucer. It looked like it was money. I don't know what it was. It was a flying saucer or what it was. It wasn't an airplane. It was not an airplane. It was down awfully low.
You're listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal podcast with your hosts, Ash Ellis and Greg Tomlinson.
Hey Ash, how you doing?
Very well. Long time no see, Greg. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. What have you been up to?
Well, what have we been up to in the past
That's right.
week? Nearly a week ago, actually.
I can't believe that. That was last Wednesday, wasn't it?
Yeah.
At the time of recording this, that was last Wednesday. And yeah, we were in Wales together
South
doing
Wales.
a talk. South Wales, doing a talk in Swansea.
Swansea UFO Network invited us down to give our talk from Ghost to Stars, which we did a talk at Power Chat last year where we had like a short. We only had like 30 minutes, so we did the talk, and obviously for this one, we had like an hour and a half. So we really spent a lot of time expanding it and just building on some of the things we talked about that we didn't have enough time to last time. And I actually think it's really good. I think it went down really well.
I think it did as well. There was a lot of questions at the end. A lot of people there. To be fair, there was a lot of people there, and yeah, it was the first time we'd run through it properly. So that was interesting. Threw in a few jokes. I thought it was really good.
It was. I enjoyed it. And we're going to be taking that talk on tour this year. If you've not seen our social media, we've got a UK tour lined up all across the UK. Some dates still to be finalised. We're going to be in Hull, York, Leeds, Birmingham, St Helens, Manchester, Pontefract, Essex, probably some other places throughout the year. We're going to be giving this talk. To as many people as possible. I think what we actually talk about is actually really interesting. And it's not something I've seen other people talk about either.
No, it's. I think it's really good. When people see it, I think they'll understand and they'll see the parallels between UFOs and the paranormal, and I think it will make a lot of sense to people. And they go, "Oh yeah, I can, I see that," and I think people will really like it, and not just biased, but I do think it was a fascinating. The time flew by. And when I thought about how long we're going to have to speak for, I thought that was going to be a challenge. But I think the challenge was keeping it to that length rather than getting to that.
Yeah.
No, it's fascinating, and the people there were really good. They had a load of valid questions. Everybody,
because it was a UFO group, it was like we asked them sort of obviously engage them throughout the talk and asking them questions and stuff, and sort of the paranormal stuff we're talking about, no one really knew much. So whereas when we gave the talk at Power Chat, that was more paranormal audience, so they knew some of the things we were talking about. Whereas this, like when we asked anybody know what the Estes method is, it's like a resounding no. So obviously we just explain what that was briefly. That's good, because I wasn't sure how it would go with it being quite a heavily paranormal base as well. How it would go at a UFO talk, at a UFO meeting. But I think it was, everyone seemed engaged throughout.
It's unusual to see a group of people that don't know what Estes is, based on the normal community that we speak with and talk to. Estes methods, pretty standard thing in the paranormal, like you say. So it was interesting, and then I think we had some people come up to us in the break and afterwards, and it's like, you were spot on with what you're saying there. That was brilliant. All those kind of things. So it was really cool. I really enjoyed it. It was a long way to go, to be fair. I didn't get home.
I think I did nearly 700 miles that week.
This is right. This this is how funny it was that by the time I filled up with petrol on the way, which at time of this was halfway through the first week of everything that's happening in the Middle East. So I went to one particular petrol station. On the way back, over the night, the few hours, it actually gone up 4p a litre in the time that we'd been away. I was like, whoa, it's mad. So yeah, it was well worth going there. Absolutely loved it. Everybody was so nice. It's going to be on their YouTube soon. I don't know when it's going to be up there, but the whole
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
So um, it'll be interesting to see how that looks on camera. And we did try and
But you are
surprise.
planning to come to one of our talks. Don't watch the
Mm,
YouTube so you don't get any spoilers.
yes, yeah, yeah,
Wait for the real
absolutely.
thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. So tonight, so we're recording this after we've had the conversation, um, and we've spoken to a gentleman by the name of Jeremy Spillane, who's co-authored a book with his father-in-law. The interesting fact, though, Ash, is
Father-in-law died in 2017.
yes, and he wrote the book posthumously. So it's an interesting account of everything that's happened to them on their journey to write this book. You will notice that we don't speak much during this episode, but this was to give Jeremy the full bandwidth to just explain it all,
Yeah.
which he does a great job of. He explains the equipment he's been using, how it all started, his journey, scientific research, um, mediumship, um, and goes into a lot of detail as to how it all came about. So we didn't need to get involved too much. We just let him tell his story.
It was nice. Just sit back and relax and listen to the fascinating story.
Yeah.
So, yes. So, we employees do the same. Just open your mind, open your ears, and let Jeremy just share his father and mother-in-law's story with you all. Welcome to the podcast, Jeremy Spillane. Is that pronounced correctly?
That's right. That's it. Thanks very much. It's lovely to meet you both and have a chat with you tonight. Okay.
So you've got a very interesting story that we're going to cover off tonight, where you say that and have shown that you're able to communicate with your mother-in-law and father-in-law, and that during during videos that you've done, you're able to communicate. They show up. So Roger and Joan show up on for you. You mention in the book that you've got Joan and Roger alive in the afterlife, that you now have a continued relationship and communication path with them following their passing some years ago. So which is absolutely fascinating. And when I read that bit, I was just like, okay, this is going to be interesting. Both me and Ash are paranormal investigators. Um, so, so, so before we get into your communication with Joan and Roger, let's go back a little bit. So, if you're happy to talk about how this came about, how did you get to a point now where you're in regular communication with them since they've passed?
Well, I've known Joan and Roger around 40 years. I met my wife, Caroline, who's their eldest daughter. They had two daughters, Caroline and Alison, who's a couple of years younger than Caroline. So I met Caroline when we were both actually 17. That was in 1978. So I sort of met Joan and Roger, Caroline's mum and dad, sort of virtually straight away within a matter of days, and obviously known them ever since, until they both died just a few years ago. So I knew them very well. They were like a second set of parents to me in many ways. And Joan and Roger had met through their church. They were both Jehovah's Witnesses. But then when they had their two daughters, then they stopped going to church apparently. And Roger stopped believing in everything that he'd been taught by the church. So he didn't believe in an afterlife anymore, which is obviously what he was taught is what happens when you die. And over the years, I did sort of try talking to him about things like that once or twice, and he was always adamant that he would say to me, "No, there's no afterlife. There's nothing. When you die, that's it. That's the end, and nothing more." And he was adamant with that. And I had been brought up myself as a Catholic by my dad. Had two older brothers, and we all went to church with my dad every Sunday. And then when we were sort of teenagers, each of us stopped going to church, and I, for one, stopped believing in what the Catholic faith taught me. I didn't believe in an afterlife anymore either, like Roger didn't. I was always open to persuasion, and had I seen some proof one way or the other, I would have, I could have believed that there was an afterlife. And my background, when I was young, when I was a child, I used to be scared of the dark. I used to have nightmares, and my parents would tell me, "Oh, don't worry, there's no such thing as ghosts or monsters, you're just imagining things like that." But I always had to sleep with the light on till I was, I don't know, probably about 8 years old or so, and I obviously grew out of it. So I didn't believe in ghosts, but I could have easily done. I could have scared myself believing in them. So I always tried to put them out of my mind, really. So I spent the next 4 decades not believing in anything paranormal. I'd never encountered anything paranormal, as far as I knew, and I didn't believe in the afterlife because it just seemed too incredible to believe. And so that's how it was. And then in 2017, Caroline's mum died totally without warning. She did have some heart condition, but she didn't make much of it. And it was always thought by everyone that Roger would die first because he had a whole list of medical problems which he'd got through, throughout his life. He'd had a triple heart bypass operation, a few decades before he died, and all sorts of other problems. He had diabetes and goodness knows what. But he'd always got through them all. And so it was always thought, I'm sure he thought that, and I think we all thought that Roger would die before Joan did. But surprisingly to all of us, Joan died very suddenly. Joan and Roger were just sat in their living room in East Yorkshire, where they lived, and apparently Joan was just getting up out of her chair one evening, and she just collapsed and fell on the carpet and didn't have time to say anything, didn't have time to say goodbye. And that was the first sudden death in our family that Caroline or I had ever experienced. And we'd had quite a number of family funerals over the years, people dying within the family. And we'd never had any hint of any signs or anything after any other people had died. And I just assumed, that's how it is. There's no afterlife, I thought. And you wouldn't expect any signs. Why would you? And then Joan dies in 2017. And I think probably because it was a sudden death, within a day or two of her dying, Caroline and I started getting a whole load of signs at our house. We lived in West Yorkshire. We were about 30 miles away from where Roger and Joan had lived. And we got these signs, and we got things like the television switching on in our house. We had a few televisions in the house where we lived, and any of them might switch on, particularly if we walked into a room. The television might switch on as you went into that room, for instance. And the one in our bedroom would switch on in the middle of the night, while we were asleep, and it would wake us up. Suddenly it's on, and people might think, well, it's just faulty televisions, but I can understand one going faulty, but not several at one time. And we had the bedside light turning on again in the middle of the night. And initially, it was quite a shock to us, but Caroline and I instantly realised it was her mum giving us signs that she was still there. And this is the first time we'd ever experienced anything like this at all. And it was just totally incredible, and we loved it. And we were talking to her saying, Joan, that's you, isn't it? And, thanks for giving us the sign. And after a while, we were sort of losing a bit of sleep, so it became a slight problem, and I did do something to try and make the television not turn on so easily. I put an extra switch in line with the power lead, but that didn't stop it, so it still turned on anyway. So of course we told Roger about these signs that we thought were from Joan, and he just didn't say anything. I don't think he knew what to say, and he had a strange look on his face, sort of half a smile and half a sort of grimace, as if he obviously thought we were both nutcases, I think, and he just didn't say a word, to be honest. And we couldn't talk to him about them. We tried a couple of times and nothing. So we thought, okay, we won't mention it again. And from his reaction, I'm guessing that he won't have had any signs from Joan. And thinking about it later, I think that's probably how she would have been, because she will have known that Roger had his own heart problems and other things. And had she given him a sign like we were getting, it might have given Roger a heart attack and he might have died there and then. So she was just sort of trying to save him from any undue frights, potentially. Also, Caroline's sister, Alison, we told her about the signs that we thought we were getting from her mum, and she didn't say anything as if she'd had any signs. So pretty sure she didn't. So for some reason, Joan was giving Caroline and I these signs, and I think it's because Joan must have sensed that we would have been receptive to them, and we would have welcomed them. She must have known that. So that's why we got them, we think. So apart from the televisions turning on and the bedside light turning on, we got one or two other things. My favourite sign of all from Joan, and it's still my favourite, is 4 days after she died, we were walking around a local ancient castle near where we lived in West Yorkshire. It's called Sandal Castle, and it's hundreds of years old. And this old castle ruin is surrounded by a big earth mound, covered in grass, a big steep slope around it. And you can walk along the top of this. And we were walking, Caroline and I, with our pet spaniel Poppy, who is also featured in the book that I subsequently wrote. So Poppy was our pet, and she was very important to us, especially at this time of Caroline's parents dying. Poppy was a sort of real grounding sort of presence for us. And we were walking, the three of us, round this earth mound, and suddenly I spotted a bird of prey in a small tree that was halfway down this grassy slope. So the bird was roughly at similar height to what we were at, because we were on the top of the mound. And I said to Karen, I'm just going to walk towards that bird, see what sort of bird it is, because I've always been keen on birds and had a reasonable knowledge of them. And as I walked towards this, and it turned out to be a female kestrel, a small bird of prey, as I walked towards it, it suddenly flew out of the tree towards the three of us, and it flew round us in two very pretty tight circles, at around the height that we were at, just above our head height. And then it flew back to the tree and perched there again. So I was certain this must have been Joan, because it's not the normal behaviour of a wild bird like that. And some people say, well, it might have just been sizing up our pet dog, thinking it might be prey. But kestrels only hunt things like little mice, and our dog was sort of 15 kilos in weight. So there's no way it would have been thinking of that, that could be a meal or anything. So I'm sure that was Joan. And Caroline did actually get one or two, I think she got 2 still photographs of that actual bird, but it was in the tree. We didn't have it, photographed flying around. So we were getting these signs from her, and these kept going, for a period of time over the subsequent, couple of years, perhaps the signs reduced in number, but we still got them, and we have had them in sort of more recent years as well. But anyway, as I say, Roger didn't believe that, or didn't admit that he believed it. So Roger was still adamant that there was no life after death. And then the last year or so of Roger's life, he suddenly all his medical problems were catching up with him, and he was becoming very ill. And the last year, or perhaps a bit more, he was spending a lot of his time in hospital, weeks on end. And then when he was well enough to come home, then he'd be at home. And Karen and I actually moved over to be near him from West Yorkshire. We had a food business, a fish and chip shop actually in West Yorkshire, and it was a bit of a millstone around our neck, and we took the opportunity to sell up and move to be near Roger in East Yorkshire. So we moved to a place just a few miles away from him, and the idea was that we would be with him a fair bit, and we would comfort him after Joan's death, and it would help us as well, because we were all a bit traumatized with Joan's sudden death, and it was a big shock to us all, of course. So we were with Roger, and we'd see him most days. He would sometimes, gradually, he sort of started living his life again. And part of the thing with Roger, with not believing in life after death, he had a sort of whole list of things he wanted to do. He liked traveling, and he did travel by himself, a couple of times after Joan had died, and also with a friend now and again. And so Roger was trying to cram in a whole list of things before he died, as he saw it. But anyway, we were with him sort of each day when he wasn't, if he wasn't away on a trip or something. And then COVID came, of course, and that was traumatic for everyone, worldwide, not just in the UK. But it was such a nightmare, all the rules and regulations that we had to supposedly follow. Luckily, Roger never got COVID, but Karen and I would visit him each day, and we'd go in the car to the local park initially, take our dog for a nice long walk, that one bit of daily exercise that we were allowed. And then we'd go on to Roger's and visit, and then we would perhaps sneak in the house and have a cup of coffee with him if the weather was too freezing to be sat in the garden or anything stupid like that. But we were just trying to stop ourselves from, going around the bend. The mental torture was terrible. But Caroline's sister Alison was a bit of a stickler for the rules, so she used to tut a bit, if we weren't sticking to them properly. But Karen and I just thought, oh well, we've just got to break the rules, otherwise we will all go insane, and that's not really sensible, is it? And Roger was, in his mid-80s by now. In actual fact, when Roger did die, he was the same age as Joan had been. They were both 86 when they died, because Joan was older than Roger. But anyway, just over 4 years after Joan had died, then Roger, was very ill in hospital and subsequently died. So about a week before he died, he went into hospital for the last time. And then, when the time came, we didn't realize that he was that close to death. We didn't really think he was going to die there. And then, we thought he'd got many months left, probably. And Caroline was called by the nurse and said, you might want to come down and be with your dad. She didn't make out it was anything urgent, but Caroline went down, and she was with her dad, holding his hand. And, he was actually out of it by this stage. He wasn't talking and didn't seem to be sort of looking with his eyes, didn't seem to be able to see her and recognize her, but he wasn't totally unconscious. So Caroline was holding his hand, and it wasn't pleasant for Caroline, I know, but he did die, and that was obviously a shock for us. But it wasn't a sudden death like Joan's death had been. So Caroline rang me and said, Dad's died, and so she rang her sister as well. So Alison, her husband Colin, and myself, the three of us went down to join Caroline at the hospital where her dad had died, and we were with him then. And we were obviously trying to comfort each other, and we were again in a bit of shock, but not quite the same shock as it had been with Joan, because Joan was so unexpected for us. So anyway, that they'd both died by now, Joan and Roger, and we'd actually been to see a medium well, it started a few years before Roger died. Alison's husband, Colin, his dad had died a few years previously, and Colin had seen an advert in the local paper for a medium called Stephen Holbrook. And he lives in Yorkshire, but he travels the country and he goes beyond, travels on ships and all sorts of things. And he does public performances. He doesn't do any one-to-ones, but he does shows. And Colin had seen this advert for Stephen Holbrook after his dad died, and Colin thought, I ought to go and see this chap, even though he'd never heard of him before. And Colin went, and amazingly, his dad came through with an amazingly accurate message through Stephen. So Colin told us about that, and he sort of recommended Stephen Holbrook to us. And we'd seen him a few times, but we'd never had any personal messages until 3 weeks after Roger had died. There was a show that Stephen Holbrook was doing. So the four of us actually went to this show because even though Roger hadn't been dead very long, I said to Karen, I think we ought to go to this show because you never know, your dad might come through. And sure enough, he did. And so Roger came through with an amazingly accurate message that sort of proved that was Roger talking through Stephen Holbrook, and proved that he was alive somehow in the afterlife. And the things he said were just incredible. So one of the things he said was, as he was leaving his home in the ambulance for the last time, going to the hospital, a week before he died, he asked the ambulance people to move 3 climbing plants that he'd bought that were in his porch. He asked the ambulance people to put them in the garden so that they'd get some rain and they wouldn't die of lack of water. And so the ambulance guy did that. And Roger said this in the message through Stephen. There's 3 climbing plants and in pots, young ones, and I want them to be taken care of. And so we'd got them anyway. But that's just amazing that he knew that. Another thing he said was that when he died, it wasn't painful or anything. There was no pain involved, and it was all totally smooth. He also said that he'd been buried in the wrong shoes, and that's true. That he was supposed to have some black shoes to go with his suit and everything, but at the last minute, for some reason, they couldn't be found. So he'd ended up having these brown shoes instead, which, you couldn't see them in the coffin, but that was right. He was buried with the wrong shoes. And also another thing he said was, I had a few books in my coffin when I was buried. You put books in with me, and that's true. So Roger was a book fanatic. He had hundreds or thousands of books, and he loved books. He was a highly educated man. He was an Oxford University graduate, and he'd been a teacher in his early years, and then he'd gone on to sort of bigger and better things in his career. And education and knowledge and books were Roger's sort of 3 main things in life. So everything about learning and everything to do with that was so important to Roger. So anyway, with this Stephen Holbrook message, we knew that Roger was obviously alive in the afterlife and effectively sort of giving us an incredibly accurate message, almost like not quite talking to us, but the next best thing, I suppose you'd say. So anyway, we were all amazed by this. So once we got home, there was obviously things to organise with the Roger's funeral had happened actually by the time this Stephen Holbrook reading. But after Roger died, then there were things to organise, and we were Caroline and I were going to the cemetery a lot by this stage because we were getting Roger's grave ready. He was going to join Joan where Joan was already buried in East Yorkshire in Howden where they lived. So one of the first things we had to do was to move some stuff off Joan's grave before Roger's funeral could take place. And we there was a potted rose plant, a small rose in a pot that needed moving. So I I brought the wheelbarrow, and Caroline was actually filming me on the iPhone, which sounds a bit odd, but we'd started using the iPhones to video things before Roger had died, because I think it was a few months before he died. We'd been at another local cemetery in the town where we lived. No relatives of ours were buried there at all. You were just allowed to walk the dog, and it's a lovely place to walk the dog. So we were walking the dog one day, and Caroline spotted this blackbird that was having a bath in a little in the recess on someone's gravestone, where you put a sort of funeral little urn with flowers in it, whatever, little pot. That was full of rainwater, and this blackbird was having a bath in it, splashing around, and it just looked really good. So Caroline decided to video that. And then when she videoed it, she saw that while she was videoing, she thought she saw a light anomaly in front of the blackbird, and it looked like a little ball of light, almost like a globe, like a big soap bubble, effectively, on the grass in front of this gravestone. So Caroline thought, that's a bit strange. And for a while, for quite a few weeks or more, we thought it was a light anomaly, but later I realized it wasn't. It was just a stray reflection in the camera lens of the iPhone. But anyway, whatever the reason, it made us start videoing whenever we were at the cemetery, where Joan and Roger were going to be buried, or whatever, where Joan was already buried. And we started videoing because we thought, well, if that had been a light anomaly, then it might be that we'll see some more. And we thought, it could be that Joan having given us signs, and maybe Roger might want to give us signs, we might see something on the videos. So every time we took a video, I would, when we got home, I'd have a really careful look through the video to see if I could see any light anomalies of any sort. And a number of times I did. And I was certain I could tell the difference between, a reflection or something that was very easy to explain, conventional. But there were some that didn't fall into that category, and I was certain they were light anomalies, and I did think these were Roger. So after Joan had died in 2017, with me not having believed in the afterlife and not having, wanted to even think about paranormal stuff, as soon as Joan died, I started trying to sort of educate myself as fast and as much as I could. So I was getting all the books I could find on everything, sort of life after death, ghosts, everything paranormal. I was watching all sorts of programs. So I was watching things, ghost hunting programs. I was reading scientific books that might explain something. So in the ghost hunting programs that I was watching, I didn't like the way they did ghost hunting, at night, and sometimes it was a bit dramatic, and I thought, they're just doing it to make an interesting program, a dramatic program, perhaps scary. And I wasn't into scary things at all. I could have easily frightened myself silly. I still didn't like the dark particularly, but I was looking at the equipment they were using and thinking, is that working or not? Is it genuine? And I did come to the conclusion that some of the equipment really was working and was genuine. And so I was sort of very interested in how the equipment might work and what it might do. So after Roger died, and we're taking these videos on the iPhone, and we're seeing odd light anomalies here and there, Caroline kept saying to me, why don't I get some ghost hunting equipment? She thought I might be interested and might like it. And I said, no, I'd be scared stiff. I wouldn't be able to do it, and I don't really want to do it. I don't see the attraction of just going and, trying to find a ghost of someone that you don't know or didn't know in life. And, I couldn't see the attraction personally from my point of view, but what she was saying did get me thinking, and I thought, well, okay, what if I did get some ghost hunting equipment, supposing it worked, and if I could track down Joan and Roger's spirits, that would be fascinating. I'd be really keen to do that. And I thought, it's going to be a big, hell of a long shot, but it's possible. And so I'd seen the equipment that I thought worked well. So I said to Karen, okay, we'll maybe try it, and I'll just get one bit of kit initially, the K2 meter, which obviously you'll be familiar with, but people that don't know, it's an EMF meter. It's a simple device, wasn't designed for ghost hunting, but ghost hunters found that they are actually surprisingly effective at detecting spirits, maybe. And if there's a spirit nearby, then this meter can give a high reading to show there's some presence nearby. So it's just a thing with 5 LED lights on it, and there's a green one that's on when you've got it turned on. The green one's on constantly, and then if you get a higher reading, then the other lights will light up to the maximum reading, which is up to the red light coming on. So I said to Karen, I'll get one of these to start with, and I'll only get genuine equipment. I won't get cheap copies, because if nothing happens, we won't know if it's just because it's a cheap thing that's not decent, or or whether there's no spirit there in the first place. I said I'll get good stuff and we'll see what happens, and if it doesn't work, then we'll sell it and recoup our money, hopefully, or some of our money. So I got this K2 meter, which is only about £40 to buy new, and we went to the cemetery where Joan and Roger were buried. And when we got to the grave, I turned the K2 meter on, and straight away, I said, Roger, are you there? And then straight away, we're getting a high reading on this thing. It's flashing up into the red. And we end up sort of having a conversation with Roger, so I thought, and I'm pretty sure we did. So the cemetery where they're buried, their graves are sort of a couple of 100 yards or more from the road. And there's no electric lights in the cemetery. There's no electricity in the cemetery at all. So if this meter was giving readings for any reason, then I was certain it would be because there must be a spirit there. And we really did seem to be able to have a conversation with Roger, as I thought, with this thing. So I'm saying, that is you, isn't it, Roger? And he flashes the thing up into the red. And saying, well, Caroline suggested I might get some ghost hunting equipment, and I told him what I was thinking of getting, and again, he's flashing the K2 meter, very strongly into the red. And I'm saying, that's you, isn't it, Roger? You're the skeptic who doesn't believe in life after death. That is you, isn't it? And again, he's flashing the meter into the red. And then at one point, we went a couple of times with this thing. I can't remember which visit, but anyway, one time Karen says to me, there's some people coming into the cemetery, you better put that away. So I'm saying, okay, I'll turn it off now. So I'm saying, Roger, there's people coming in. I better turn it off, otherwise people will think we're weirdos. And again, big flashes of the K2 meter. So we're even able to have a bit of a laugh with him, a bit of a joke, but I was certain that was him. So anyway, I told him that because he's responded so well on this K2 meter, that there's 2 other bits of kit I'm planning on getting that I'd seen working well on these programs, and one of them is an SLS camera, which people who don't know, it's a structured light sensor camera, is the official name, and it's basically a sensor that was designed for video games, sort of 15, 20 years ago or whatever. It's a Microsoft thing, and people had these Microsoft Xbox games, which I never did, but I'd seen them around once or twice. You had one,
I had one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
they were popular,
Cool.
but I never actually used one. I don't remember ever actually seeing one in use, to be honest. But
Novelty
these
was
things,
very
yeah, these things were common, weren't they? And they're comparatively cheap. And although they're obsolete now, you can still buy the sensor. I've bought a couple since I've got the first one, and you can buy them still in a box, totally unused, and they're really cheap to buy. And I got initially I got this one from America because I didn't know about the ins and outs of them, how they worked or anything. And I bought this thing, and I sort of vaguely knew this SLS camera from America was based on this sensor, but I wasn't sure if they'd modified the sensor or what. But subsequently, I found out that it doesn't need modifying. You can use them as they come out the box. But anyway, I bought this thing from America, and I told Roger, I said, if it works, this camera will maybe see you as a spirit, and if it does see you as a spirit, it'll put a green stick figure onto the screen where you are. So generally the thing is, this sensor is plugged into a tablet computer, and you see just an ordinary picture of the scene that the thing's looking at. So it just looks totally like what you're seeing with your eyes. But if it detects a spirit, then it'll put a green stick figure onto the view in the tablet screen. And so that's what we did. We ordered this one, and the other thing I ordered was a Ovilus 3, which people who don't know, it's like an electronic talking dictionary that spirits can somehow operate. And there's just over 2,000 words in its database. These are American, so there's American words. Some words, you might not use in English language, but even though Roger obviously was a English was his thing, his subject, if you like, that he'd studied. And one or two words he has trouble finding the English total equivalent of, but he does well. And so I said to him, we're going to order this Ovilus 3, which I'd seen on the program, seemed to be the main one at the time that I thought seemed to work the best and seemed to be the most popular. So again, this was an obsolete thing, but they went for a lot of money, and this was sort of after the COVID time. So things like this were very popular. So even secondhand, they were a fortune. So this Ovilus cost nearly £1,000 from America. I won it on a auction website, or eBay to everyone who knows. And anyway, the Ovilus and the SLS camera both came on the same day from America, surprisingly, even though they're from different companies. So when they came, Caroline was at work, and it was December 2022. It was freezing cold, really way below freezing. And we had our elderly spaniel, who we would take her to the cemetery or wherever, and she had trouble walking because of her age and that. We had a pushchair for her, so I had all the equipment in her pushchair, so that it wasn't obvious when you went into the cemetery that you got a load of electronic gadgets with you, because that some people would have been very upset, possibly, had there been anyone else in the cemetery at the time. We could hide the stuff. If there was anyone around, if someone came, we could hide them in the pushchair. But anyway, I went in by myself because Caroline was at work this day when this equipment had come, and so I went with the dog and got to the grave and turned the equipment on, the Ovilus and the SLS camera, and also the K2 meter. And I should just say, actually, that since we've been filming things initially, before we got the equipment, been filming with the iPhone. So when we got any of this equipment, I still kept filming it all. Every time I used it, I would film it with the iPhone, because I wanted a record of what, if anything happened. I didn't want to not have filmed it and then regret it. And so everything we did, I filmed, because I wanted to refer back to it later if there was anything interesting at all. So anyway, turned all this equipment on at the graveside, and as soon as it was on, and I sort of held the camera up and looked around, suddenly there's a green stick figure there immediately, and I realised that was Roger. So I'm getting quite emotional at this. I'm saying, Roger, that's you, isn't it? And occasionally he came out with a suitable word on the Ovilus. Now, often on the Ovilus, he comes out with words and you think, what's he mean with that word? I don't understand that. But every now and again, he would come out with a suitable word, and I can't remember exactly that first day any appropriate words that he came out with, but there were one or two that he did. And when Roger does show on the equipment, which he still does, this is 3 years later, and he still shows on the equipment. When he does, he'll come out with some words like squeeze or hug or kiss or something like that. So I sort of know that these are words that he uses, and he's sort of just basically saying, effectively, I'm here, and I'm giving you a hug or whatever. And it's very nice. It's very sort of reassuring. But there have been times, in later times, when I used the camera and had the Ovilus on, that he'd come out with the most amazingly appropriate words. So I knew that was definitely him. So anyway, this first time I had the equipment on for just over 20 minutes, and by this stage, me and the dog were getting absolutely frozen stiff. My fingers, I could hardly feel them anymore because it was so cold. But Roger was there all that time. And in the end, I said, this is just amazing, Roger. I can't believe what you're doing. I thought, I might have a long process of trying to find you using this equipment. And I thought it might never happen. It could go on for months or years even. And suddenly you're there at the first time I turn it on. I couldn't believe it. So I said to him, I'm going to turn it off now, even though you're still showing up. I apologize for turning it off while you're there, but me and the dog need to get home now, and we'll come back in a couple of days when Caroline's not working, come back at the weekend. And would you be able to perhaps bring Joan with you, next time when we come and see you again? So that's what happened. So a couple of days later on the Saturday, Caroline and I and the dog went to the cemetery, turned the equipment on, and then Roger didn't show immediately. It was a few minutes before I saw him, and then I saw Roger, and then shortly afterwards then saw another stick figure and realised that was Joan. So suddenly they're both there on camera, and Joan and Roger both showing up to us on the SLS camera, and again it was a really emotional time. And like in life, Joan was showing up a lot more reluctantly than Roger was. So Roger was sort of spearheading all this, but Joan would just show up occasionally. If there was a good reason to, she would show up. And obviously with Caroline, her daughter, being there, that was a very good reason for Joan to come. But on the whole, she doesn't show up so much, just now and again. And that's, as I say, she was like that in life. Roger would tend to be the one who was leading the way with something, and Joan would perhaps be there if she felt it wasn't too boring or whatever. She might sort of show her face and be around for a bit, and then she might walk out the room because she thought, oh, this isn't for me, I'll leave it, and she'd disappear. So they seem to have the same characters as they did in life. So one thing that people might wonder is this ghost hunting equipment, it is, or you might think it's a bit gimmicky, and because Roger was such a book fanatic, and I rapidly realized that as I was filming and saving all these videos, that I was going to have to do something with these videos. And I thought, what can I do? And I thought I'll sort of list them on YouTube and that, but that didn't seem to make a lot of sense. And I was showing various people, but I wasn't getting the reaction I thought I might. And after a while, I realized I would perhaps have to write a book about it, because Roger was so keen on books. And I've got the impression that Roger was sort of effectively guiding me or directing me to write a book, because Roger wanted me to tell his and Joan's story, and Roger's effectively saying to us via the equipment and what have you that, look, I was wrong. There is an afterlife and you can see me on it, and I want you to tell everyone about it via a book. And that's what happened. But before I actually started to write the book, having got the SLS camera where it seemed to work really well, and then the Ovilus, and he would come out with the odd really good word, but I realised very rapidly that the Ovilus, even though he might come out with the occasional very good word, it's not like a conversation, it's not a sentence, and it's not like you talking to someone at all. So you have to sort of interpret what's coming through, and every now and again there's a word and you think, oh yeah, that's totally right. So I rapidly realised that I needed some help to try and communicate with Joan and Roger, and I realised I wanted to try and get some mediums involved. So Stephen Holbrook, that fantastic medium who Roger had come through with a great message with 3 weeks after he died, Stephen Holbrook only does public performances, and he wouldn't do a one-to-one. And I was a bit fed up that he wouldn't do a one-to-one, and I couldn't persuade him. And he says, no, that's not what I do. I only perform in public, and that's just how it is with me. So I was contacting some other mediums, and there were one or two mediums that were actually very negative, and they were saying to me, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing with this equipment. You could be trapping Joan and Roger's spirits here on Earth, and there'll be earthbound spirits, and that's really bad for them. You should just leave them, because that way they can sort of make their way to the afterlife and, wherever they are supposed to be going. But if I'm trying to sort of talk to them, communicate with them, I could be trapping them and, doing something terrible to them. And I was really worried about that. That was the last thing I wanted to do. But luckily, I spoke to a really good medium who is familiar with all this equipment. She uses it herself, and she's called Ali Mather, and she's also in Yorkshire, not too far from where we live. And I said what I wanted to do with the equipment. I wanted the medium to sort of give me a reading effectively while I've got the equipment on, and we can hopefully see Roger, maybe Joan, on camera while she's giving us a reading. And I thought that would hopefully prove that the spirit is there in the room with us wherever we are, and we're getting the reading simultaneously. And that would just prove, I thought, that it's, Roger, say, in the room with us, and he's talking to us through the medium. So she agreed that we'd try this. So we went over to her house, took the equipment, and then went into the room where we were going to have the reading with her. And I turned the equipment on, and while we're waiting for her to make some coffees for us, Caroline and I, we're sat down and I'm filming, and there's Roger's spirit there in the room with us. So for, I don't know, 5 minutes or more, he's on camera while she's making the coffees. And then as she comes in the room with the coffees, suddenly the spirit seems to go and disappear into Ali Mather, into the medium. And I said, oh, Ali, it's such a shame. He's been here all this time, and then just as you came in the room, he's disappeared into you. And she said, no, that's a good thing, actually. It means he's blended with me and should get a better reading with that. And that's what happened. So we got this amazing reading through Ali Mather, and she was coming out with all the Roger's complicated medical history, and it was so spot on. It was incredible. And every time she said something that was so accurate regarding his medical problems, then Roger would flash the K2 meter very strongly, as if to say, yes, that's exactly right, that you're right, you've got it, or whatever. And it was just an amazing reading. But Roger didn't show up again as a spirit while we were having this reading, but he was obviously there. And I had had the Ovilus on as well, and every now and again he would come out with a suitable word. But with the K2 meter, he was definitely sort of emphasizing things that she said and agreeing with it. So it was an amazing reading. So Ali Mather, she's such a positive person, and in communication with her, I was saying to her, I said, I'm planning to write a book about Joan and Roger and what they've done. And she was saying, yes, you will do that. I can see that you're going to do that, and it will be successful. And she gave me some very good advice. And she said, have you heard of a book and a film called The Secret? And I said, no, never heard of that. And she said, well, it's a sort of motivational thing, and if you sort of can visualize something that you want to achieve, then if you sort of picture yourself doing it, very keep it in your mind. For instance, the book, if I visualize me doing this book and it gets done and finished and sold to people, then she said, it can happen, if you're very positive about it. So I watched this film she gave me, and it was a strange film, like a strange marketing sales type thing. But I did sort of keep all its messages to heart, and I did visualize this book, and eventually it did happen. It did take a couple of attempts. My initial attempt at the book, it didn't seem to be working out. I'd written a few chapters, and I was sort of getting stuck, and I was thinking this isn't really working, and I wasn't sure how to incorporate all the pictures, the photographs, or to be honest, they're nearly all videos. How could I incorporate videos into a book? I couldn't work it out, and I thought, well, if I'm going to say have still pictures in the book printed, it makes the book more expensive, and publishers won't want to do that, and it's not going to really be the same thing. And then eventually I hit upon the idea of having the QR code on the front cover of the book, and then people can access all the videos that we've got that are relevant. There's actually a video for each chapter in the book, and the chapter describes what you see in that video, and via this QR code you can access the YouTube channel that we've got with these videos on, and you can see that video for that chapter. And I realized that should work very well, and it meant there's no pictures in the book, so the book is as cheap to print as it could be, and therefore hopefully a publisher might be interested. So that was my plan, and I was starting to write the book and then struggling a bit again. And Caroline's best friend in Australia, Joe, who is an English teacher, had offered to edit the book for me, which was great. And so when I was a bit stuck with it, it just so happened that Joe came over to visit Caroline by herself, not with her husband. She came over to England and stayed with us for a little while, for a couple of weeks or whatever. And she sort of motivated me to carry on with the book. She said what I'd already written was decent. She could, sort that out. And but I still had a lot of chapters left to write. And she motivated me. And so when she went home, it was just before our summer holidays, and Caroline and I both, well, at the time I was a school bus driver, which I still am, and I get all the school holidays, which is really nice, and it gives me time to do things. And so I spent the rest of the summer holidays that year finishing writing the book, and the chapters just all sort of fell out of me, and with very little effort all the rest of the book was written. So then Joe was able to edit it, and it didn't need a lot doing to it apparently. So Caroline had, regarding publishing, now I'd got the book written, I thought, we can perhaps send it to some publishers and see what happens. But I was sort of struggling to find a publisher, but Caroline somehow on the internet found this publisher that sounded ideal. They deal in spiritual and paranormal stuff, and neither of us had heard of them. And anyway, we sent the book to them, and straight away they offered me the deal to publish the book, which is amazing. So everything just sort of slotted into place, and I'm certain that Roger has sort of planned all this, and he's organised it all, and he's pulling all the strings. And from there's he and Joan in the Afterlife and various other people up there helping, and then there's us here on Earth, and between the few of us, there's a half a dozen or more of us in this team, and we're doing it. And so that's what happened. So the book was written, and it's going to be published just in a few weeks' time now, at the end of April. And so it is actually available now to pre-order on Amazon and plenty of other places. Barnes and Noble in America, the Guardian bookshop in the UK, the Guardian newspaper bookshop, and anywhere else that sells books. So it can be pre-ordered, and then you don't pay anything until they send it out. So it should be delivered sort of very early May. So for anyone who is interested, who likes the sound of any of this, the book is called Alive in the Afterlife. Sorry, it's called Joan and Roger, Alive in the Afterlife. And I don't know if have you seen the front cover of the book? I don't know if Gav might have sent you that, but
Yes.
if you can see that is the front cover of the book, and that's the QR code I was talking about. So anyone now, even on the Amazon listing, you can use that QR code and it works, so you can see the videos. And I'm really pleased the book ended up exactly how I planned it, except for two very minor points. So one is my name's on the book as the author, and I had wanted Roger's name on it, but Caroline's sister Alison didn't want her dad's name on it as a co-author for some reason. I still don't quite understand why. She was happy with everything else about the book, but she wouldn't have that, so fair enough. And the other thing was I wanted Joan and Roger's actual photograph on the cover, but that wasn't allowed, so it's just a generic couple viewed from the back. But another thing on the cover is there's a photograph of the equipment in use. You can see it there in this picture. And
Yeah.
that picture there is the actual SLS camera footage taken at the cemetery when Joan and Roger appeared to us for the very first time. So it's not some cobbled together, mocked up thing, but it is the actual photograph, which, as I say, was a really emotional thing when they both showed up on camera for the first time ever. So yeah, it's just all been incredible, but it is their true story. And as I say, Roger was a book fanatic. Books were everything to him, and education was everything. So Roger is definitely saying, "Look, I was wrong. You know, there is an afterlife, and I'm here, and I'm showing people that there's an afterlife. You can see me on this SLS camera, and you know, believe me, I'm here, and this is our story, which is true." And he wants as many people to read the story as possible, and it's really, I suppose, aimed at anyone who's undecided, like I was till 2017 when Jonah gave us those signs, and as Roger had been all his life. So many people, I think, you know, they've been taught perhaps through religion, you know, me a Catholic and Roger Jehovah's Witness and all the other Christian faiths and plenty of other religions. You know, we've all been taught that there is an afterlife, but we all sort of take it on trust, and it, to many of us, it just sounds too unbelievable. It just doesn't sound possible, you know, in the West, where we have all the scientists and so many things. The scientists seem to have the upper hand with the story, and if it can't be sort of measured or brought into a lab and seen properly, then scientists generally say, you know, it's not real, it doesn't exist. But I know there are niche scientists, you know, parapsychology people and others who are sort of chipping away at it. But the general feeling from scientists seems to be that, you know, everything spiritual and that is a bit balmy, a bit nonsensical. It's not real, but many of us know now that it is. So this book is aimed at people who are not sure and open to persuasion. One of the biggest criticisms, obviously, of the SLS camera is there's plenty of people who say, and it's on the internet and everywhere and on YouTube and that, they tell you why an SLS camera doesn't work, you know, why it's not real. It's just sort of mistriggering. And the room I'm in now, it's got this very strong pattern wallpaper and furniture here and there, and the camera, skeptics will say, is just picking up on shapes in the room, and it's just seeing things, and then it thinks, oh, that could be something, and it puts a stick figure on, even though it's not really a spirit there. But another thing I needed for the book was scientific validation that this SLS camera really is seeing spirits. So initially, I made contact with the top author and biologist Rupert Sheldrake, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, and after Joan died, I read a number of his books, and I was amazed at some of the things he was describing, and he's come out with so many scientific experiments that prove you know, telepathy is real, and he's done numerous experiments with lots of people, and they've been replicated by other scientists, and it proven that telepathy really is a real thing, does work. And it seems that distance isn't an object. You know, people on the other side of the world can be just as effective with telepathy as someone in the room with you. So I contacted Rupert Sheldrake, and I showed him, you know, one or two of my videos, and said, you know, would you be able to validate, confirm, if you like, that this stick figure is seeing a real spirit? And he said, well, no, I don't do that. You know, that's not what I do. And I said, well, who could I talk to? What scientist would be able to do this? And he put me in touch with the SPR, the Society for Psychical Research, who I'd never heard of at that time. And they're the oldest organisation in the country, or in the world rather, who were set up to look specifically for evidence of life after death. And he put me in touch with them, and after quite a protracted business trying to get in touch with the right person and emails that didn't get through to people, etc., eventually I did get in touch with people that were slightly interested in Roger's story. And I was hoping they would come and do a proper investigation on Roger and everything on the SLS camera and the other equipment. But in the end, there was only one person who seemed interested and seemed to be free to come. So it wasn't a proper official SPR investigation where they would have two people. But anyway, this Aaron Lomas, he was a parapsychology PhD student at Northampton University who specialised in all this sort of thing. But he was a member of the SPR, and he's a member of the Spontaneous Cases Committee who investigate things like this, like hauntings or whatever. Anyway, I persuaded him, and he came up to see us in Yorkshire, and he came for the weekend, and I showed him all the videos, and he was taking all these notes, and he was sort of writing up everything about Roger, and he was interested, but he wasn't totally convinced. And again, he was putting forward the argument for the SLS camera, being fooled in our house, particularly with all the patterns in the wallpaper and the furniture and everything. And he's saying, the camera might just be tricked into thinking there's something there when there isn't really. But he was still sort of open to things, and it was strange because he's taking his notes. He's sat on our settee, and there's Roger showing up, as a stick figure next to him on the settee, and Roger's coming out with one or two great words on the ovilus, and one of them I remember was records, and that's Aaron is sort of recording things, and I think he said notes or something like that, and Roger. Aaron's writing his notes on his, in his notebook sort of thing. So I knew it was Roger, but Aaron wasn't totally convinced. So over the next 18 months or so, I said to Aaron, look, I'm writing this book, and I really want some sort of scientific validation that this is Roger on the SLS camera. What would it take? What would make you believe that the camera really is seeing a spirit? And he said, well, if we could have the camera in a totally neutral room, say a totally plain white room with plain white walls, no pattern to them, if the spirit showed up there on one of those white walls, then I would be convinced. So I said, okay, well, let's try and do that. And Aaron, he wasn't familiar with SLS cameras. He'd obviously heard of them, but he hadn't used one himself. So I got him one, and I sent it to him. I said, look, you do your various experiments with this, get the feel of it, and then when you're happy, then we'll meet up, and we'll do some tests together with the two cameras. And he agreed. So some months after he'd got the camera that I'd sent him, then once he was happy that he knew all about it, then he booked a room at Northampton University, and it was actually over the Easter holidays, and there was virtually no one else on campus, which was great. So we were there almost by ourselves. So I drove down 150 miles to Northampton and met him, and we went into this room, and then we started to do a few tests with the two cameras, him with the one I'd sent him and me with my one. And the idea was that we'd do various side-by-side things with both cameras looking in the same direction and see, did it see the same things? And he had a whole series of tests planned out, and we sort of went through all this. I'm not sure what they all were. It was all something I wasn't too bothered about. As long as he was happy, then that was fine. But I was wanting to see Roger there on this white wall, and I'd asked Roger to come, and I was very hopeful he would, because I'd found that Roger would show up wherever I had the camera on. When I turned the camera on, virtually every time Roger is there. He might take a while to show. It can take 20 minutes sometimes for him to show up, and I don't know why that is, but it does sometimes. But nearly every time he will show up eventually. So I'd said to Roger, will you come down to Northampton and show up on camera? And Roger always seems keen to sort of help with anything like this, anything scientific or in the way of sort of showing people that it's him. So anyway, I said to Aaron, you keep taking your notes, all your sort of very sort of detailed notes that he takes about everything whenever he's doing any investigation. I just tend to turn the equipment on and video it and carry on and get going, because I know that if I were to take lots of notes like Aaron often told me to, I knew that Roger would probably get bored and he would disappear before he'd even shown up in the first place. So I just sort of get going, and most times that seems to pay off. So I turn my camera on, and Aaron's taking all his notes, and I'm filming Aaron sat at his table. I'm filming the plain white wall behind him. Anyway, after about half an hour, Roger hadn't shown up, and I'm starting to panic and thinking, "Oh dear, this is a real blow." I really wanted Roger to show up. I wanted this scientific proof so that the book's got some validation and people are going to believe that this is all true. So, as with all computers, they can play up sometimes, and this SLS camera is normally pretty reliable, but occasionally I do turn the computer off and restart it. So I did that this time, and within a few minutes of restarting it, then suddenly there is a green stick figure there showing up on the plain white wall. So I say to Aaron, "Right, Roger's here. I'll keep filming. Don't you get up. Don't sort of stand up and walk in front, because sometimes if a physical human walks in front of the spirit, it seems to stop the camera working for a while. It loses track of the spirit. That's my experience anyway." And I said to her, "And you keep sat where you are, and I'll film the spirit. And then when the spirit disappears or whatever, I'll show you the video, and you can see, what's happened." So anyway, Roger's showing up there for sort of over 4 minutes, and I'm saying to Aaron, "Right, is there anything else you need me to do for you to accept that that is a spirit that it's seeing?" And he said, "No, that's it." So I was really happy. That was all the validation I needed. So I then showed him what I'd filmed, and he seemed happy with that. So if anyone is interested in seeing that, if you use that QR code I was saying about on the book cover that you can see on the Amazon listing or wherever, then you can get to our YouTube channel, and to get the flavour of Roger on the SLS camera and what the whole book is about, the first video that perhaps it'd be worth watching it's entitled "SPR Investigator Confirms SLS Camera Sees Genuine Spirit," and it's a 6 minute 1 second runtime. So I'm just saying that because the initial video is a lot longer, and I think that's on that same channel, but the 6 minute 1 second version is like the main highlights, if you like. There's over 4 minutes of Roger showing up as a green stick figure, and Aaron sort of accepting that yes, the camera is seeing a genuine spirit. So yeah, basically Roger had done everything he needed to do, and I just couldn't have been happier. And so in the book there's a chapter on the SPR and all the investigations. There's a chapter on each of the mediums that helped with the book. So there's Stephen Holbrook, who Roger showed up to initially. We did actually film with this equipment at one of Stephen's shows. Caroline asked him if we could, and he said yes. And I was amazed that he agreed. And so we're on the front row, because you have to be within 12 feet of something for the camera to detect it, which I've sort of experimented with and verified. So had to be on the front row, and Stephen walks around a lot during his shows. So while he's coming out with various readings for various people, then a number of times there are several spirits on camera. Anyway, there's one spirit that Caroline is convinced is her dad, Roger, showing up as a spirit behind Stephen Holbrook. So during his shows, he has an interval, and when the interval's coming up, he tells the audience, he says, "Right, we're going to have a break now, and if anyone wants to buy one of my books," because there's 4 books that have been written about Stephen Holbrook, he's pointing to a pile of books behind him, and he said, "People can come and buy one of these books." And then behind him on the SLS camera is a big green stick figure spirit, and it appears to be pointing to this pile of books. Well, Roger being a book fanatic, that's exactly what he would have done. So I'm pretty sure, like Karen says, that is her dad there on camera with Stephen Holbrook. So that was amazing. So there's a chapter on Stephen Holbrook. There's a chapter on Ali Mather, the amazing medium, who we went to her house and she gave us incredible reading. And then there's also a chapter on Liz Murphy. She's an American medium, and it's a long story how we sort of got in touch with her. the basic story is Caroline was buying some stuff on eBay, some knitting patterns or whatever, and this Liz Murphy in America was selling them, and Caroline bought some, and then suddenly Caroline gets a message from Liz Murphy saying, I'm stopping doing the knitting stuff, but I'm becoming a full-time or professional medium, and if you want a reading, I'll give you the first one free, sort of thing. And that's how that all came about. Anyway, it is quite a convoluted story, and we had a reading with her, and it was good, but we hadn't told her that I was using the equipment in our living room here in the UK while I was filming Caroline with her iPad and Liz Murphy in America giving her a reading. So Joan and Roger did show up to that event, and I got them on camera as stick figures. And when we told Liz Murphy after the event, she was really upset with us that we'd filmed without warning her or telling her that we were going to use the stuff, and she was really cross with us, which I fully understood. I said to Caroline at the time, you should tell her, but Caroline said, no, if nothing happens, then I didn't want to sort of frighten her off and not have her do the reading in the first place. So anyway, about a year later, I persuaded her to do another reading, and by this time she'd sort of calmed down, and she agreed to do a reading where it was all above board, and she knew what we were doing, that we were using the equipment. And that time it worked really well, and so I'm filming Caroline again on her iPad while Liz Murphy's in America. We're in our living room here in England, and I'm filming it. And all the time, for over an hour, while the readings are going on with Liz Murphy, Joan and Roger are showing up there as stick figures on the settee or around the settee near Caroline. And they're just sort of there in the room with us for the whole hour, showing up for the whole time while Liz Murphy is giving these phenomenal readings. And the reading from Joan, from Caroline's mother, was so spot on. It was incredible. And she was coming out with things like Liz is saying, I can see your mum with a whole load of children. Did she have a lot of children? Have you got lots of brothers and sisters or whatever? And Caroline said, no, not at all. There's only me and Alison. I don't know what that is. And then suddenly it hit her, and she said, oh, yes, Mum was a nursery nurse. She worked with children. She was surrounded by children. She loved children. So that's exactly right. And Liz is coming out with all these incredibly accurate things about her mum, about Caroline's mum, Joan. And she's saying things like, would I be right in saying that your dad, it was all about him? It was sort of me. And Caroline says, yeah, that's exactly right. He was pretty selfish. And Liz is coming out with all this stuff. And so it's amazing that mediums, can come out with the exact character of the person. And it's totally apparent that the people, even when they've lost their physical human body, they're still the same person, in the afterlife. They've still got all the same character traits, and they behave in the same way. And it is all just totally amazing. So yeah, everything in this book, as I say, it's totally true, and it's Joan and Roger's story, and Roger wanted his story to be told. He wants as many people as possible to read his story, and I'm still in awe of what they've done. It's still totally incredible, and it's over 3 years now since we got this ghost hunting equipment. And Roger loved electronic gadgets, and it's totally appropriate that this is actually a serious book about the afterlife. There's serious lessons here for all of us on Earth, what happens when we die, which is something I've always wondered. What happens when we die, and till I was convinced there was an afterlife, which Joan finally convinced us of. We don't know, but here we are, and we're seeing Joan and Roger showing up on an electronic gadget, and that really is them. And to the skeptics who say, this camera isn't really seeing spirits, well, we've had the scientist who's confirmed that it is seeing spirits. And if you think about it, what is there to see? The camera is looking at an invisible spirit, and the only way it can show it is by detecting it, and it puts this green stick figure on. So all the skeptics who say the cameras don't work, well, I know that they do, and the scientists have sort of confirmed that. And the camera, technically, it's absolutely full of electronics, and the software that runs on the tablet is, there's a load of software, and it needs a very high spec computer to run properly on it. So it's incredibly sophisticated. So it's just amazing that it does what it does. But the camera actually, as I say, it's called structured light sensor. So it sends out 1 million infrared dots. So if those dots are sort of working at the maximum range of the camera, which is 12 feet, then each dot is only about 3 millimeters away from the next dot. So there's this amazing grid of infrared dots, and somehow the camera is sending them out, and then as they get reflected back off whatever it sees, then the camera can detect if any of these dots have moved out of position. So the camera was designed initially to see living physical human beings, and it can track them, and it knows where there's a physical human being. But when it's looking at a invisible spirit, then people say, well, how does it work? And from everything I read, and people that have sort of explained things to me, as far as I can tell, I think what's happening is that the camera with these infrared dots, I think it sends out the infrared, and then when it gets reflected back, if there's any movement in the air, and the spirits are basically some form of electrical energy, or they can influence electrical energy somehow. So I think there's like an electric field in the air, obviously invisible, and an electric field can move water vapor, because water is a polarized molecule. So I believe what's happening is all air has some water vapor in it, at some percentage or other. And if the spirit moves through its electric charge, if it moves some water molecules where the spirit is, then the infrared dots of light are imperceptibly moved slightly, and the camera can detect that slight rearrangement of the water molecules. And so I think that's how it detects the spirit there in the first place. So yeah, inevitably this camera is looking at an invisible thing, and it puts a green stick figure on, and that's how I believe it works. So Joan and Roger have never done anything like appear as a manifestation, like a ghost as such. And Joan and Roger or Roger particularly, seems to operate the equipment. And as far as I can tell, the SLS, the Ovilus talking dictionary, and this K2 meter are the things that he can operate. I've tried lots of other bits of kit, and he doesn't seem to be able to operate them. So, other spirits can activate various things, EVPs and that, which other spirits can do, where they talk on a recorder. We've tried that with Roger. It doesn't seem to work. But Roger has manipulated mobile phones. When we were at the cemetery before his funeral, and we moved this potted rose plant, Caroline was filming me while I did that and loaded it in the wheelbarrow. And that video, for some reason, it was recorded on half speed. Well, she hadn't set that, so I believe Roger had manipulated the phone to do that. And initially, it just seemed like a strange thing. Why has he done that? And it was months before I realised, when I studied the footage, that he wanted me to see something particular, I think. So on this rose plant that I was moving off Joan's grave prior to Roger's funeral, there appeared to be lots of little flies flying around this rose. And I thought, well, that's a bit strange. I don't remember seeing all these flies at the time when I was moving the plant, because there were so many on the screen. I would have seen them had they all been there, but I hadn't. And when I looked really carefully and tracked each one and sort of zoomed in, it seemed to me they weren't physical flies, not real insects, but they were some sort of spirit flies, I think, which is what I've heard of. And they were just like little dots of light, almost, either a white dot of light or a black one. So the white ones would move around in strange paths, and they seem to be coming into and out of the soil around the rose. So a white dot of light, for instance, would seemed to be sort of moving in a strange way, almost like a flying fly, and then it would instantly turn to black or a black one would instantly turn to white, and they would suddenly just disappear, and you couldn't see them anymore. So you couldn't see sort of proper. Well, you could see sort of wings, but they were moving quite slowly. That they didn't obviously a fly. The wings are sort of invisible because they're beating so fast. But as far as I could see, these weren't physical flies, and what I think they were, and obviously could be wrong, but I think they were perhaps each one was an individual spirit that was coming for Roger before his funeral, to welcome him to the afterlife or whatever. And that's my conclusion from that. We did have one or two other interesting things. It was actually, I think it was, might have been a year or so after Roger had died, if I remember rightly. I could be wrong with the timing, but Caroline was working for the local newspaper in Goole, the town where we live, and for some reason she was just something made her look out the window, and so she looked out the window at the building opposite, and she saw all these little dots of light in the sky, all sort of dancing round, and it was a bright blue sky, really sunny day. There's all these little dots of light sort of jumping around, dancing around above the roof of the building opposite. So she gets her iPhone out to film, and she only gets one on film, on video, but it's the most incredible thing. So it's some sort of flying creature, and I looked at this footage, and this thing is moving really quickly, so I slowed it down as much as I could, and I've zoomed in, and I've got the stills of the thing flying. So it's about the size of a bird, a smallish bird like a sparrow or a blackbird or something, and it comes down from the sky, and it's got a black body, but you can't see a head or tail. There's no features to the body, it's just a black shape, but it's got these luminous white wings that are sort of beating. They appear to be sort of really brightly lit wings, and they're beating slowly, and this creature flies down in a straight line from the sky, and then it disappears into the brickwork of the building opposite, and it's the most amazing thing. So another of the videos on our channel, on this YouTube channel that we've got, it's signs from Joan and Roger. So on that video there's a few different things, but one of them is this strange flying creature, whatever it is, or supernatural creature. And I've got the video slowed as much as I can, and I've got each of the stills that I can get from it where you can see the wings sort of beating. But what it is, I don't know if that maybe is another spirit fly, but a bigger one, but who knows. But yeah, Roger can manipulate phones, and it seems widely accepted that spirits are able to affect electronics and electrical stuff comparatively easily, and that's what they do. But as I say, Roger just seems to be able to, in the way of ghost hunting equipment, use the SLS, the Ovilus, and the K2, and all the other things I've tried with him, spirit boxes, and I tried a later Ovilus, an Ovilus 5, a brand new one. I thought he might be able to do that, just as well as the Ovilus 3, but he couldn't seem to operate that. So I've just stuck with what I know works for him, and we're happy with that. And as I say, over 3 years since getting this equipment, and he's still able to show up every time virtually that I turn it on. So he doesn't seem to have shown up tonight, but as I say, it's just one of those things you just can't predict when he'll do things like that. But he has shown up in the last day or two, but tonight isn't the night he's going to show. But never mind. So I think really that's probably about it. So anyone that's interested, as I say, you can have a look at the book and pre-order it. So that's Joan and Roger Alive in the Afterlife. So look on Amazon and just enter that, Joan and Roger Alive in the Afterlife, and it'll come up and you can have a look. We've got a website, aliveintheafterlife.co.uk, and if you go to that, there's various links to our Facebook and Instagram and what have you. Caroline, their daughter, my wife, she does all that. I'm not well up on all this all Facebook and all the rest of it. I just don't really understand that she does all that. So I don't know. But anyway, there's all the links to all the various things. And when this podcast is all edited and available, and the link for that'll be on the website as well, so people will be able to find that. So I think that's it as far as I can. As far as I can think, have you got any particular questions, or have I bored you silly, or what?
No, it's been absolutely fascinating.
Has it?
I was thinking questions as I was going through, and then you'd answer it and then answer it. And I was going to
Oh,
speak to
good.
you about the scientific stuff because I
Right.
read in the book about the SPR, and we've
Yeah.
spoken about the SPR before, and they've been involved in like the Enfield poltergeist, many other
Oh,
big.
right.
Well, so
Yeah.
so and then
Mm,
you nailed that bit. So no,
oh,
it's
good.
a very thorough um, sort of account of how you and Roger have sort of worked on the book. It is a shame that
Right.
you couldn't get his name on as co-author or author.
Yeah. But
But
if the book is ever reprinted, then maybe I'll get his name on then. But it's a minor point. But literally, he has been, the main driving force behind this. I've just sort of gone along with his wishes, I think, because in life, uh, he was similar to what he's doing here. He sort of got me to do this book. In life, he would give me projects sometimes, like for instance, in his house, he would say, Jeremy, I want to change all my light bulbs to LEDs because they're cheaper to run and whatever. And could you do that? So that was a project he gave me. And like Caroline's sister's husband, Colin, he'd give him similar projects, but different ones, So he'd dish out these projects to us. And it feels like that with the book, he's saying, Jeremy, I need you to write a book about what Joan and I are doing. And, Joan started it and Roger's carried it on. And he's given me this a special project to do. And it really genuinely feels like that. And it's great. I'm just so amazed at what he's done. And as I say, so much of the book has just spilled out to me without loads of thinking. It's some of the chapters I've just sort of come out with it, and with very little editing, it's there. So I'm certain that's him sort of giving me that through my mind, or however it works. I'm not quite sure. Channeling, they call it, don't they? But maybe that's it. But he's definitely organized all this, and there's so many things that are sort of, you'd say they're coincidence, but they're too much to be coincidence. They're what's been organised. So, well, one of the things is his surname Watkins. Now, the publisher of this book, it's owned by a company, Watkins Media, but you wouldn't know that, because the name of the publisher, it's Sixth Books, so it's not obvious. But definitely that was something that he organised one way or the other. And there's so many little details like that you think, oh gosh, that's an amazing coincidence. But it's just been planned from beyond here, and it's just amazing. So it's just great, I just can't believe what he's done. I still can't quite believe what he's done. And as I say, till Caroline and I were in our sort of mid to late 50s, we'd never experienced anything like this at all. And basically, we lived pretty ordinary lives. But then suddenly, all this happens, and we could have never, ever foreseen what they would do, and it's just been so incredible. And I still can't believe it. But it's true and it's real, and yeah, I'm in awe of them. It's just amazing. And part of me thinks, well, why didn't my parents, when they died, why didn't they do this to me, rather than Caroline's parents? But it's not really my place to question it. It's just a whole series of circumstances. So Roger was a big skeptic, didn't believe in life after death, and it's that's motivated him. I think he's thinking, God, suddenly he dies and he realizes that he's still alive in the afterlife, and he's thinking, blimey, I was wrong, and I need to tell people I was wrong, and look at the evidence. People need to know this, and they do. So he's basically sort of confirming that all the main religions are right. There is life after death, even though it seems almost like a wacky idea to, materialist scientific opinion or views. It does seem bonkers, but it's true. So even though the scientists can't explain all the ins and outs of it, and a lot of scientists say all this spiritual stuff is rubbish, we know it's true. We've got people, beyond approving that it's true. And I think, a high percentage of people believe in ghosts and the afterlife, don't they? But it's the scientists, generally the mainstream scientists, who say no, it's not real. But I don't know. It's strange. Other cultures, Eastern cultures and Native Americans, they obviously know the spirits, and they've known that for years. The Egyptians, they all believed in it. And when I was young, I was fascinated with the ancient Egyptians and Tutankhamun, and how the pharaohs were buried and that. And there were these stories of curses and that. And at the time, my teaching, my education at school was all scientific and that, and I did pretty well in the sciences. And the general view was, all these things about the curses of the mummies and all the rest of it, it's sort of, people would laugh at it, the scientific, supposedly, people would laugh at it, and they'd say, oh, that's just all rubbish. But actually, I think so much of it is true, and there's just so much we just don't understand. I think humans only understand probably a fraction of a percent of everything that's happening, and the universe and everything. It's just so incredible. And I always believed in a God, but I just didn't believe in life after death for 40 odd years. And then suddenly Joan proves that, there is life after death, and Roger carries on that proof. And it's just amazing. And I'm just so impressed, and I'm just so happy what they've done. And I'm so pleased to be a part of what they've organised. It's just amazing. But yeah, Roger was definitely motivated. It was his school teacher sort of background coming out. He wanted to tell people, this is what I've learnt since I've lost my physical body, and I want you to pass the message on. So it's just all brilliant, and I'm so impressed with them. So yeah, and there's so many other things, aren't there? The UFOs and that, which I used to think were rubbish, but the last few years I've realised that's all true as well. And all these things, they all interact with each other, don't they? And the paranormal is such a vast subject, and it seems like, physical reality is just a tiny aspect of everything in the universe, and there's just so much we just don't understand. But doesn't mean it's not real. So much of it is real. It's just we've got so much to learn, haven't we? So any bit of knowledge that comes our way, it's just valuable, and it's nice to get these little tidbits and find out a bit more of what we're all about. But so yeah, that's as much as I can say, really. I think I've said everything that I can think of.
No, definitely. Perfect message, and thank you so much for sharing your story, Caroline's story, Joe and Roger's story, everybody.
Oh, thanks.
We'll put the links to the books and YouTube and everything on our show notes as well, so people can
It's
click and
brilliant.
find it easily.
Yeah.
And good luck with the launch.
Thanks.
Obviously, it's coming out in the next month, so all the
Yeah,
best
yeah,
with the launch.
not long
Congratulations
now.
as well. It's not an easy thing to
Oh,
do to write a book, so
thanks ever so
well done.
much. Well, it's been a real privilege to talk to you both tonight, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. Glad you've found something of interest there, and I'm hoping all your viewers will be equally interested. And anyone who is interested, if you just sort of pass the message on, tell your friends or anyone else who you think might be interested. And if you do end up ordering the book and reading it, then hopefully you'll be interested in the whole full story, because what I've said tonight is just merely scratching the surface of Joan Rogers' story. There's so much in there, and yeah, it's just all amazing. But yeah, it just keeps going from strength to strength. So yeah, I'm just so grateful to you both for inviting me on your podcast, and yeah, it's just been a real pleasure talking to you. So thanks so much. It's been great.
More than welcome.
Thank you. Right. Okay.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thanks for listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal with Ash Ellis. Title music created by Steve Yarwood and Ambiinfinity. If you like the show, please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, X, and Instagram. And if you really like the show, please rate and review the show wherever you are listening. It really does help. See you next time, and until then, stay weird.